What was manna? During the 40 years between the time the Israelites left Egypt and entered the Promised Land, they faced harsh conditions, including a scarcity of food. To alleviate this problem, God miraculously provided the Israelites with bread from heaven, called manna. The manna appeared each morning, and the Israelites were given specific instructions on gathering and consuming it. Manna was only to be eaten fresh and not to be stored. Stored manna bred worms and stank. The exception being the day before the Sabbath, when twice the amount of manna was gathered. This manna did not spoil overnight. Exodus chapter 16. What was manna? Interestingly, the Israelites asked the very same question. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." Exodus chapter 16 verse 15. The Hebrew word translated manna literally means, "What is it?" The Bible nowhere discusses the chemical composition of manna. All we are told is that it was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Exodus chapter 16 verse 31. Numbers chapter 11 verse 7 states that manna's appearance was like bdellium, or resin. Psalm chapter 78 verse 24 refers to manna as grain from heaven, and the next verse calls it bread of angels. So, manna seems to have been literal bread that God caused to miraculously appear each morning during the Israelites' wilderness wanderings. The miracle of manna ceased shortly after the Israelites entered the Promised Land, Joshua chapter 5 verse 12. Far more important than manna's physical qualities is what manna foreshadowed. Manna is a type, or foreshadowing, of Jesus. After Jesus miraculously fed the 5,000, they wanted him to give us this bread always, John chapter 6 verse 34. Jesus tried to get their attention off of physical bread and onto the true bread of life. In Matthew chapter 4 verse 4, he said, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." Jesus quoted this verse from the scriptures to explain that it takes more than bread to stay alive. Truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. John chapter 6 verse 32-35. Sadly, the people could not get their minds off of physical bread long enough to understand the spiritual truth Jesus was declaring. John chapter 6 verse 36-59. They were more concerned with the condition of their stomachs than the condition of their souls. Just as God provided manna to the Israelites to save them from starvation, he has provided Jesus Christ for the salvation of our souls. The literal manna temporarily saved the Israelites from physical death. The spiritual manna saves us from eternal death. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. John chapter 6 verse 49-50. Another question relating to the content of the Ark or the Covenant which is often asked is, what was the significance and purpose of Aaron's rod? Aaron's rod, or staff, played an important part in God's plan to lead the Israelites out of Egypt and into the Promised Land. In ancient Israelite culture, a rod was a symbol of authority that was later adopted by nearly all worldly kings, and is called scepter. Shepherds used rods to guide and correct their flocks. Psalm chapter 23 verse 4. When God called the shepherd Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he demonstrated his power by performing miracles using Moses' rod. Exodus chapter 4 verses 1-5, Numbers chapter 20 verse 11. God also chose Moses' brother, Aaron, to perform miracles with his own rod. Exodus chapter 7 verse 19, 8-5, 16. Aaron's rod was used to perform the plagues on Egypt. On one occasion, Aaron's rod turned into a snake in Pharaoh's court. When the Egyptian Magi also turned their staffs into snakes, the snake that had been Aaron's rod swallowed theirs up. Exodus chapter 7 verses 8-10. It was Aaron's rod that God used to turn the water of Egypt into blood. Exodus chapter 7 verses 19-21. And it was Aaron's rod that summoned the plagues of the frogs. Exodus chapter 8 verses 5-6, and gnats, verses 16-17. After Moses and Aaron had led the Israelites out of captivity, God set apart Aaron and his sons as priests, Exodus chapter 28 verse 1, Numbers chapter 18 verse 1. The rest of the Levites were to minister to the Lord in the tabernacle, offer sacrifices, and hear from God for the good of the whole nation. The most famous story of Aaron's rod begins with a few of the Levites becoming disgruntled about the extra authority given to Moses and Aaron. In Numbers 16, Korah, who was also a Levite, joined with two others, Dathan and Abiram, to incite a rebellion against Moses and Aaron. In verse 3, Korah says to Moses, "You have gone too far. The whole community of Israel has been set apart by the Lord, and he is with all of us. What right do you have to act as though you are greater than the rest of the Lord's people?" Because of this defiance of the Lord's authority, God caused the earth to open up and swallow these three men and their families, verses 28 to 33. However, rather than submit to the Lord, the other tribal leaders joined the revolt. Numbers chapter 16 verse 41 says, "But the very next morning the whole community of Israel began muttering again against Moses and Aaron, saying, 'You have killed the Lord's people.' The Lord desired to wipe out the whole company, but Moses and Aaron fell on their faces and pleaded with him not to destroy them. God relented and, instead, sent a plague throughout the company of rebellious Israel. The plague killed 14,700 of them. To put an end to the unrest, God once again used Aaron's rod for a miracle. God commanded Moses to have the leader of each tribe of Israel bring his rod or staff to the tent of meeting, with Aaron's rod representing the tribe of Levi. Each of the 12 leaders was to have his name inscribed on his rod. The Lord told Moses, "Buds will sprout on the staff belonging to the man I choose. Then I will finally put an end to the people's murmuring and complaining against you." Numbers chapter 17 verse 5. They left their rods before the Lord, and in the morning, Aaron's staff, representing the tribe of Levi, had sprouted, budded, blossomed, and produced ripe almonds. Aaron's rod didn't just sprout buds, it brought forth flowers and fruit, a clear demonstration of the power of the one who gives life. Verse 10 says, "And the Lord said to Moses, Place Aaron's staff permanently before the Ark of the Covenant to serve as a warning to rebels. This should put an end to their complaints against me and prevent any further deaths." Hebrews chapter 9 verse 4 tells us that Aaron's rod remained in the Ark of the Covenant as a testimony of God's choice of Aaron and Moses to lead his people. Aaron's rod was also a reminder that God does not put up with rebellion against himself or his chosen representatives on earth. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 10. Those who murmur, complain, and cause division within the body of Christ are to be rebuked. James chapter 5 verse 9. 1 Timothy chapter 5 verse 20. 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 23. God's plans on this earth are far beyond any single human being. He desires that we work together, in one accord, to obey him and reflect his glory.